This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's May 15th, 2026. On this day in 1718, an English lawyer named James Puckle invented the world's first machine gun. In 1718. And to be fair, it doesn't meet the modern definition of machine gun, but that term was used at the time because it was the first ever firearm with a mechanism to automatically load the weapon. It was a large-bore flintlock long gun, stood on a tripod with a crank-operated magazine that could be quickly removed and replaced with another loaded magazine. In a time when elite soldiers were firing 3 to 5 shots a minute with muskets, the Puckle machine gun could get off 9 shots in the same amount of time. It was an impressive piece of engineering, but for some reason, the British military wasn't interested. It was never put into actual use, but it is a weapon option in the video game Assassin's Creed Rogue. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Back when I was a baby reporter, I went down to Murfreesboro for an interview that was supposed to become my very first long-form story. Turns out I wasn't a skilled enough reporter yet. That interview never made it to air. But boy, did I learn a fascinating bit of local history that day. Because the person I interviewed was the Murfreesboro native who invented the .50 caliber sniper rifle. The guns of that caliber did already exist before Ronnie Barrett did his thing. In fact, he told me that his drive to invent a rifle was sparked by photographing another .50 caliber gun in action. Because before he made guns, Barrett was a photographer. It was a family business with a photo studio on the square near the Rutherford County Courthouse. But he enjoyed shooting guns as much or more than shooting photos. He told me about setting up a long hallway in the studio to be a makeshift shooting range that he'd sometimes use after hours, just for fun. So when the studio was hired to take pictures of a demonstration that included a boat outfitted with a Gatling gun, Barrett jumped at the chance. It was right up his alley. Now, Gatling guns have a lot in common with Puckle's early machine gun. They are also on a tripod and have a mechanism which, in the early days, was operated by hand crank to load and fire in rapid succession. The Gatling gun that Barrett photographed fired large .50 caliber cartridges, ammunition first developed to take out tanks in World War II. Barrett was really impressed by the firepower. He wanted badly for the chance to fire a .50 caliber weapon himself, and he really wanted to hold a firearm in his hands that could fire off a cartridge that size. But every type of .50 caliber gun at that time was mounted on a tripod or something like that. The recoil was just too much for a normal rifle. The force of a shot would be enough to injure the shoulder of anyone who tried it. Barrett became fixated on the idea that it didn't have to be that way. He was a handy guy who enjoyed tinkering, and before long he had a new hobby, trying to design a damper mechanism that could absorb the force of a .50 caliber gunshot and prevent that dangerous recoil. Barrett sketched out ideas for a design at his dining room table. After that, he told me he rented a storage space in Smyrna to use as a workshop whenever he had spare time. When he realized he needed parts that didn't exist, he worked with a local tool and die business to make new ones. Once Barrett felt pretty confident that he'd come up with a prototype that could work, he had to test it. But he didn't have access to anything like a professional test facility, and he couldn't just hold the rifle and fire it. If he was wrong, he could end up with shattered bone. His solution was to use the old metal swing set in his parents' backyard. Barrett described to me how he dug a hole in the ground deep enough to encase the rifle's muzzle end, hung the rifle from the swing set frame so that it pointed straight down, rigged up the trigger so he could fire it by pulling a rope. And that's how he test-fired his rifle until he was satisfied that it was safe enough to try to fire normally. Barrett broke the code, so to speak. He figured it out. He lived out the dream of firing massive ammunition from a rifle that he held in his arms. And then he made it his career. Well, making that rifle anyway. Starting in the late 80s, Barrett Firearms became one of the world's leading manufacturers of sniper rifles that could take out large targets. The U.S. military bought his gun for use in the first Iraq War and called it the M82, or Light 50. So did militaries across the globe. It became an iconic symbol of modern warfare. In fact, back when I interviewed Barrett for that story that didn't come to fruition, his rifle was one of my husband's favorite weapons to use in the Call of Duty video game. And one of the more memorable moments in that interview came when he handed me a non-firing replica that Sylvester Stallone used in a Rambo movie. Now, one of the most surprising things to me at the time was the realization that an important part of the military arsenal was made in a nondescript factory on the edge of Murfreesboro. It's a town I knew well, but I'd been unaware of that local product. I was also surprised at the time to learn how much business Barrett did in selling those high-powered semi-automatic rifles to civilian customers. Ronnie Barrett knew that other firearms aficionados would get a kick out of target practice with a .50 caliber rifle, so that was always an important market for him. Now, gun control advocates say wanting the experience of firing a cool gun isn't reason enough for high-powered military-grade weaponry to be available to just anyone. The kinds of firearms Barrett makes have long been at the center of debates over who should have access to guns or which firearms should be restricted. And in fact, some American states do ban private ownership of that rifle. For example, the Connecticut assault weapons ban specifically names the Barrett Light 50 in a list of firearms that are not allowed. It's now a felony to either buy or sell them in that state. Barrett Firearms is now owned by an Australian company, but it does still manufacture its rifles in Rutherford County. And because Tennessee's laws around guns are attractive to firearms companies, Barrett has company here. In the last decade or so, several other gun makers have moved operations to our state. For example, Beretta opened its Gallatin handgun plant in 2016, and small arms accessory maker Troy Industries moved its headquarters to Clarksville in 2021. In just a few minutes, the continuing drama of disagreements between Nashville and the state. That's coming up after the newscast.
Here's the mantra I think about at WPLN. We connect the dots. It captures a mindset that our journalism is not merely about the latest press release or proclamations by officials. Instead, we can develop expertise, dig deeper, and look to history to understand what's happening now. I'm Tony Gonzalez, news director. When I'm planning coverage and editing stories, the best part is being part of a team that's curious about our community and invested in its future.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A federal judge is allowing Tennessee's congressional maps to go into effect. The ruling last night was issued in the case filed by a group including the Tennessee Democratic Party. It came less than 24 hours before the candidates are finalized. The judge did not give a written explanation with the ruling. Tennessee Democrats say this initial rejection doesn't mean they'll lose in the long run against a map they say is racist. Republicans have said that they didn't take racial data into account. Meanwhile, a fourth lawsuit has been filed to challenge the new congressional maps. The NAACP filed its latest legal challenge in federal court yesterday. That's in addition to its local petition against the state's redistricting plan. The federal lawsuit was filed in partnership with the League of Women Voters. It alleges that the new congressional map was pushed through the legislative process in just 48 hours with minimal transparency or public feedback, despite warnings it would weaken black political representation. Republicans say that the maps do not take racial data into account, only political data, and that the new maps reflect the state's overall conservative bent. Meanwhile, former Nashville Mayor Megan Barry has pulled herself out of contention for Congress. She had initially announced earlier this week that she would be running in the newly created 6th District, which incorporates parts of Nashville and surrounding counties to the east. Barry was in several new candidates, throwing their hats in the ring during the extended filing deadline, which closes today at noon. In a statement to WPLN News, Barry says the race isn't for her, but that she hopes, quote, the courts will put a stop to this chaos. In addition to the Tennessee Democratic Party, the NAACP, and the League of Women Voters, the ACLU has also sued over the maps. A federal judge will hear arguments on that case next week. Fisk University is rolling out plans for a new billion-dollar project that will bring a data center to the North Nashville campus. School officials say the move will bring jobs and increased opportunities for students. WPLN's Camelia Burris has more.
The historically black university will soon house a 100,000 square foot facility consisting of a data center and new academic center. The project will include a renovation of campus residence halls and a larger event space. University President Agenia Clark calls this the quantum leap.
We're going to revitalize the historic infrastructure. We're going to be expanding our academic resources, and at the same time, our plans are to build new facilities on this campus.
A data center is a physical building that manages massive amounts of digital data. Backers of the project say it will create more jobs for members of the community. However, these centers often cause conflicts with neighbors over air quality, water use, and electricity cost. Clark says the university is working with data center experts and Nashville Electric Service to ensure that their neighbors do not experience a rise in energy cost. The project is set to take place over the next 10 years. Camelia Burris, WPLN News.
Next year's focus for Metro Arts budget will be on youth in crisis. Metro is building a new Nashville youth campus for empowerment that will hold Davidson County's juvenile court and other resources for justice-involved youth. Metro Arts has funded an artist to create a sculpture for the lobby and a collection of 20 art pieces that will hang throughout the building as well. Metro Arts asked for an $85,000 increase to their budget. Interim Executive Director Ashley Batchelder says the additional money will create an artist residency type program that would engage young people in making art.
This would actually be creating artwork that is in the private spaces where the public doesn't have access to, where there's some of the temporary housing and the meeting rooms and other spaces where there's not as much of a robust plan for art, but it's equally as important.
Metro Arts also asked for a 10% increase in their grants budget, saying it could fund 11 more projects. Tennessee students are among the top performers in the country for academic recovery after the pandemic. The annual education scorecard measures student growth in math and reading nationwide. The report combines state assessment data of 3rd through 8th grade students with national data to show academic recovery trends. Tennessee ranked 2nd out of 38 states in math improvement and ranked 4th out of 35 states in reading recovery. Some Tennessee school districts received special recognition for showing exceptional progress compared to other districts in the state. These include Johnson City, Putnam, White, and Murray County schools. The report credited Tennessee's gains in reading recovery to its early literacy initiatives and efforts to strengthen foundational literacy statewide. Tennessee's largest coal ash site could permanently pollute water near the Cumberland River. The Tennessee Valley Authority has proposed capping unlined storage sites for coal ash at the Cumberland Fossil Plant in Stewart County, about 60 miles northwest of Nashville. But WPLN's Caroline Eggers says the state ultimately has the authority on the plan.
Improper coal ash storage is dangerous for people and the environment. Coal ash contains substances that are cancer-causing, radioactive, and neurotoxic. The Cumberland coal ash site has unlined pits and ponds, and they're leaching heavy metals like arsenic, cobalt, and lithium into groundwater near the Cumberland River. This is coming from TVA's own monitoring data. Now, the utility wants to close those storage sites instead of paying for it to be moved into a lined landfill. The plan requires approval from the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. TDEC is accepting comments from the public on the plan through tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
The window will soon close for Tennesseans to apply for FEMA aid in the wake of the January ice storm. The deadline is June 10th. So far, the federal agency has given out nearly $24 million, which has gone to more than 10,000 applicants. The money reimburses people for disaster-related expenses, including temporary lodging and home repairs. It can also go toward medical bills and transportation related to storm injuries. This level of assistance was approved by the president in April and is open to people in 29 counties. This is in addition to several $1 million FEMA has given to local governments and rescue nonprofits. You can learn more on WPLN's homepage or by going to disasterassistance.gov. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. A key piece of Nashville's Civil War-era history is getting a makeover. The city is working to update Fort Negley with a more accurate presentation of its story, which is complicated. It's a place built by forced black labor for the Union. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams reports the renovation comes at a time when such efforts are being discouraged by the White House.
Along the winding trail at Fort Negley, a group of college students is in the middle of a final exam. But instead of blue books or essays, TSU's Dr. LaRotha Williams has brought his students out for a sort of walk and talk.
They didn't have much in material possessions, but what did they bring with them?
Their clothes and stuff.
How they dress. Food.
Their language.
Religion.
Williams is asking his students about the thousands of people, many of them enslaved or formerly enslaved, who built the stone fortress, which sits atop a hill overlooking downtown.
It's different telling a story in a space where the actions actually occurred.
Fort Negley was a Union fort, but was constructed by black laborers, many of whom were pressed into work. In 1862, roughly 3,000 men, women, and even children were forced to build, amidst harsh working conditions and little provisions. It's a place that's had a major impact. After the war, laborers settled nearby, establishing important black neighborhoods. While those were later decimated by the interstates, descendants like Gary Burke are carrying on the memories today.
My great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Bailey, was a soldier here in 1865.
Burke is involved in reenactment efforts and visits often.
Walking amongst the ancestors that once dwelled here brings me a sort of peace and a sort of comfort.
His goal is to make sure that the workers are never forgotten.
You know, unless you pay attention as you walk around the trail to the historic panels that give you information, you'll never know what happened here, that this was a Union fort and that you had African Americans who were forced into labor and what indignations they experienced while doing that.
That sometimes invisible history is something Dr. Williams' students, like Zariah Browning, say is uncomfortable.
Knowing that it's just a place that people walk through and they don't know the cultural significance behind it is kind of like hard to process.
Fort Negley has undergone decades of neglect. Scattered across the park are plaques with historical information. Some are sun-bleached and unreadable. Others emphasize the site's history as a Union fort, downplaying its importance in local black history. That whitewashing, Dr. Williams says, is another reason why Fort Negley is emblematic.
Who determines what we remember and what we forget? And this place is ground zero for that, right? This being a, quote, Yankee fort. In the Confederacy, you know, there's not going to be a lot of glorification of what happens here.
It's also something the city is looking to rectify. This year, Nashville has embarked on a multi-million-dollar expansion as the first phase of a long-awaited master plan. It's updating the educational signage and adding a memorial lawn. Williams has pushed for a more comprehensive history.
And people were talking about putting a Kroger here, then tennis courts, all kind of bad ideas. But we are here, and it's a testament to council people and the mayors and the community who decided to say, okay, this is a place that we are going to protect.
In fact, it comes at a time when the federal government is dissuading similar efforts. In 2025, President Trump issued an executive order directing agencies to remove, quote, divisive race-centered ideology from federal institutions and monuments. Fort Negley isn't directly impacted, but Nashville's Mayor Freddie O'Connell wants to push back on the president's narrative.
There are people trying to legally prevent histories like those of Fort Negley from being included in textbooks or even our discourse. And that is why the Fort Negley story is one worth knowing, especially right now.
And on a recent Friday morning, at the peak of Fort Negley, a group of volunteers are waist-deep in a rectangular hole.
The west edge is at 23.
They're excavating a small plot of land. Nearby, city archaeologist Adam Fracchia is showing tourists some of their findings.
So these are actually percussion caps.
Oh, wow. Huh.
So in the Civil War, your musket had to have a cap to ignite the powder, rather than a piece of flint that would...
He says careful digging is a critical way of filling in gaps in historical knowledge.
You know, if we don't preserve these elements, and elements all over the city, then we start to lose people, the picture of people. You know, since a lot of these people weren't written about in the historical records.
What's left behind is often their only record. As Nashville compiles more voices, more artifacts, more understanding, the city is hoping to tell the whole story of Fort Negley. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.